and then an old fellow starts blowing into his bagpipes and all the gougers shuffling their feet to the tune the old cow died off. And one or two sky pilots having an eye around that there was no goings-on with the females, hooting below the belt. So he went deeper, as I was saying, the old dog seeing the tin was empty starts mousing around by Joe and me. I'd train him by kindness, so I would, if he was my dog. Give him a rousing fine kick now and again where it wouldn't blind him. Afraid he'll bite you, says the citizen, jeering. No, says I, but he might take my leg for a lamppost. So he calls the old dog over. What's on you, Gary? Says he. Then he starts howling and mowling and talking to him in Irish, and the old foes are growling, letting on to answer, like a duet in the opera. Such growling you never heard as they let off between them. Someone that has nothing better to do ought to write a letter pro bono publico to the papers about the muzzling order for a dog the like of that. Growling and grousing and his eye all bloodshot from the drought is in it and the hydrophobia dropping out of his jaws. All those who are interested in the spread of human culture among the lower animals, and their name is legion, should make a point of not missing the really marvelous exhibition of canine therapy given by the famous old Irish red setter wolf dog formerly known by the sobriquet of Gry Owen and recently rechristened by his large circle of friends and acquaintances Owen Gary. The exhibition, which is the result of years of training by kindness and a carefully thought-out dietary system, comprises, among other achievements, the recitation of verse. Our greatest living phonetic expert, wild horses shall not drag it from us, has left no stone unturned in his efforts to elucidate and compare the verse recited and has found it bears a striking resemblance, the italics are ours, to the rands of ancient Celtic bards. We are not speaking so much of those delightful love songs with which the writer who conceals his identity under the graceful pseudonym of the Little Sweet Branch has familiarized the book-loving world, but rather, as a contributor DOC points out in an interesting communication published by an evening contemporary of the harsher and more personal note which is found in the satirical effusions of the famous raftering of Donna McCarmside, to say nothing of the more modern lyrics at present very much in the public eye. We subjoin a specimen which has been rendered into English by an eminent scholar whose name for the moment we are not at liberty to disclose, and we believe that our readers will find the topical allusion rather more than an indication. The metrical system of the canine original, which recalls the intricate alliterative and isosyllabic rules of the Welsh England, is infinitely more complicated, but we believe our readers will agree that the spirit has been well caught. Perhaps it should be added that the effect is greatly increased if one's verse be spoken somewhat slowly and indistinctly in a tone suggestive of suppressed rancor. The curse of my curse is 7 days every day and 7 dry Thursdays on you, Barney Kiernan, has no sup of water to cool my courage, and my guts red roaring after Lowry's lights. So he told Terry to bring some water for the dog, and, gob, you could hear him lapping it up a mile off. And Joe asked him would he have another. I will, says he, a carrot, to show there is no ill feeling. Gob, he's not as green as he's cabalgale looking, arsing around from one pub to another, leaving it to your own honor, with old Giltrap's dog and getting fed by the ratepayers and corporators. Entertainment for man and beast. And says Joe, could you make a hole in another pint? Could a swim duck? Says I, same again, Terry, says Joe. Are you sure you won't have anything in the way of liquid refreshment? Says he. Thank you, no, says Bloom. As a matter of fact, I just wanted to meet Martin Cunningham, don't you see, about this insurance of poor Dignam's. Martin asked me to go to the house. You see, Dignam, I mean, didn't serve any notice of the assignment on the company at the time, and nominally under the act the mortgagee can't recover on the policy. Holy wars, says Joe, laughing. That's a good one if old Shylock has landed. So the wife comes out top dog. What? Well, that's a point, says Bloom, for the wife's admirers. Whose admirers? Says Joe. The wife's advisors, I mean, says Bloom. Then he starts all confused mucking it up about more gagger under the act like the Lord Chancellor giving it out on the bench and for the benefit of the wife and a trust is created but on the other hand that Dignam owed Bridgman the money and if now the wife or the widow contested the mortgagee's right till he near had the head of me addled with his more gagger under the act. He was bloody safe he wasn't running himself under the act that time as a rogue and vagabond only he hit a friend in Cower. Selling bazaar tickets or what do you call it Royal Hungarian Privileged Lottery. True as you were there. Oh, commend me to an Israelite. Royal and Privileged Hungarian Robbery. So Bob Doran comes lurking around asking Bloom to tell Mrs. Dignam he was sorry for her trouble and he was very sorry about the funeral and to tell her that he said and everyone who knew him said that there was never a truer, a finer than poor little Willie that's dead to tell her. Choking with bloody foolery, and shaking Bloom's hand doing the tragic to tell her that. Shake hands, brother. You are a rogue and I'm another. Let me, said he, so far presume upon our acquaintance which, however slight it may appear if judged by the standard of mere time, is founded, as I hope and believe, on a sentiment of mutual esteem as a request of his favor. But, should I have overstepped the limits of reserve let the sincerity of my feelings be the excuse for my boldness. No, rejoined the other, I appreciate to the full the motives which actuate your conduct and I shall discharge the office you entrust to me consoled by the reflection that, though the errand be one of sorrow, this proof of your confidence sweetens in some measure the bitterness of the cup. And suffer me to take your hand, said he. The goodness of your heart, I feel sure, will dictate to you better than my inadequate words the expressions which are most suitable to convey an emotion whose poignancy, were I to give vent to my feelings, would deprive me even of speech. And off with him and out trying to walk straight. Boost at 5 o'clock. Night he was near being lagged only Paddy Leonard knew the Bobby, 14A. Blind to the world up in the shebeen in Bride Street after closing time, fornicating with 2 shawls and a bully on guard, drinking porter out of teacups. And calling himself a Frenchie for the shawls, Joseph Minot, and talking against the Catholic religion, and he serving Mass in Adam and Eve's when he was young with his eyes shut, who wrote the New Testament, and the Old Testament, and hugging and smugging. And the 2 shawls killed with the laughing, picking his pockets, the bloody fool and he spilling the porter all over the bed and the 2 shawls screeching laughing at one another. How is your testament? Have you got an Old Testament? Only Paddy was passing there, I tell you what. And see him of a Sunday with his little concubine of a wife, and she wagging her tail up the aisle of the chapel with her patent boots on her, no less, and her violets, nice as pie, doing the little lady. Jack Mooney's sister, and the old prostitute of a mother procuring rooms to straight couples. Gob, Jack made him toe the line. Told him if he didn't patch up the pot, Jesus, he'd kick the shite out of him. So Terry brought the 3 pints. Here, says Joe, doing the honors. Here, citizen. Slainly, says he. Fortune, Joe, says I. Good health, citizen. Gob, he hit his mouth halfway down the tumbler already. Want a small fortune to keep him in drinks. Who is the long fellow running for the mayoralty, Alf? Says Joe. Friend of yours, says Alf. Nanny, says Joe. The member. I won't mention any names, says Alf. I thought so, says Joe. I saw him up at the meeting now with William Field, MP, the cattle traders. Harry Opus, says the citizen, that exploded volcano, the darling of all countries and the idol of his own. So Joe starts telling the citizen about the foot and mouth disease and the cattle traders and taking action in the matter, and the citizen sending them all to the right about, and Bloom coming up with his sheep dip for the scab and a Hughes drenched for coughing calves and the guaranteed remedy for timber. Because he was up one time in an acre's yard, walking about with his book and pencil. Here's my head and my heels are coming, till Joe Cuff gave him the order of the boot for giving lip to a grazier. Mr. Now, teach your grandmother how to milk ducks. Pissa Burke was telling him in the hotel the wife used to be in rivers of tears sometimes, with Mrs. O'Dowd crying her eyes out with her 8 inches of fat all over her. Couldn't loosen her farting strings, but old Cod's eye was waltzing around her, showing her how to do it. What's your program today? A. Humane methods. Because the poor animals suffer, and experts say I'm the best known remedy that doesn't cause pain to the animal, and on the sore spot administer gently. Gob, he'd have a soft hand under a hen. Georgia Guerra. Cluck cluck cluck. Black Liz is our hen. She lays eggs for us. When she lays her eggs she's so glad. Guerra. Cluck cluck cluck. Then comes good Uncle Leo. He puts his hand under Black Liz and takes her fresh egg. Georgia Guerra. Cluck cluck cluck. Anyhow, says Joe, Field and Eddie are going over tonight to London to ask about it on the floor of the House of Commons. Are you sure? Says Bloom, the councillor's going. I wanted to see him, as it happens. Well, he's going off by the mailboat, says Joe, tonight. That's too bad, says Bloom. I wanted particularly. Perhaps only Mr. Field is going. I couldn't phone. No. You're sure? Nannon's going too, says Joe. The League told him to ask a question tomorrow about the Commissioner of Police forbidding Irish games in the park. What do you think of that, citizen? The Slúin a Chairman. Mr. Cowconacher Modafarnham. Nat. Arising out of the question of my honourable friend, the member for Shillelagh, may I ask the right honourable gentleman whether the government has issued orders that these animals shall be slaughtered though no medical evidence is forthcoming as to their pathological condition? Mr. Alfors, Tamoshan. Calmed, honourable members are already in possession of the evidence produced before a committee of the whole House. I feel I cannot usefully add anything to that. The answer to the honourable member's question is in the affirmative. Mr. Aurelio Riley, Montanoa. Nat. Have similar orders been issued for the slaughter of human animals who dared to play Irish games in the Phoenix Park? Mr. Alfors, the answer is in the negative. Mr. Cowconacher, has the right honourable gentleman's famous Mitchelstown telegram inspired the policy of gentlemen on the Treasury bench? Oh? Oh? Mr. Alfors, I must have notice of that question. Mr. Staley Bunkin. Don't hesitate to shoot. Ironical opposition cheers. The Speaker, order. Order. The House rises. Cheers. There's the man, says Joe, that made a Gaelic sports revival. There he is sitting there. The man that got away James Stephens. The champion of all Ireland at putting the 16-pound shot. What was your best throw, citizen? Nabaklies, says the citizen, letting on to be modest. There was a time I was as good as the next fellow anyhow. Put it there, citizen, says Joe. You were in a bloody sight better. Is that really a fact? Says Alf. Yes, says Bloom. That's well known. Did you not know that? So off they started about Irish sports and showing games the like of lawn tennis and about hurling and putting the stone and racy of the soil and building up a nation once again and all to that. And of course Bloom had to have his say to it about if a fellow had a rower's heart violent exercise was bad. I declared to my aunt to my caster if he took up a straw from the bloody floor and if he said to Bloom, look at Bloom. Do you see that straw? That's a straw. Declared to my aunt he'd talk about it for an hour so he would talk steady. A most interesting discussion took place in the ancient hall of Brian O'Sear Nains in Traden of Bretagne B.A., under the auspices of Slewin A. Charon, on the revival of ancient Gaelic sports and the importance of physical culture, as understood in ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient Ireland, for the development of the race. The venerable president of the noble order was in the chair and the attendance was of large dimensions. After an instructive discourse by the chairman, a magnificent oration eloquently and forcibly expressed, a most interesting and instructive discussion of the usual high standard of excellence ensued as to the desirability of the revivability of the ancient games and sports of our ancient Pan-Celtic forefathers. The well-known and highly respected worker in the cause of our old tongue, Mr. Joseph M. Carthy Hines, made an eloquent appeal for the resuscitation of the ancient Gaelic sports and pastimes, practiced morning and evening by Finn McCool, is calculated to revive the best traditions of manly strength and prowess handed down to us from ancient ages. L. Bloom, who met with a mixed reception of applause and hisses, having espoused the negative, the vocalist chairman brought the discussion to a close, in response to repeated requests and hearty plaudits from all parts of a bumper house, by a remarkably noteworthy rendering of the immortal Thomas Osborne Davis evergreen verses, happily too familiar to need recalling here, a nation once again in the execution of which the veteran patriot champion may be said without fear of contradiction to have fairly excelled himself. The Irish Caruso Garibaldi was in superlative form and his stentorian notes were heard to the greatest advantage in the timid honored anthem sung as only our citizen can sing it. His superb, class vocalism, which by its superb quality greatly enhanced his already international reputation, was vociferously applauded by the large audience among which were to be noticed many prominent members of the clergy as well as representatives of the press and the bar and the other learned professions. The proceedings then terminated. Amongst the clergy present were the Very Reverend William Delany, S.J., LL.D., the Right Reverend Gerald Malloy, D.D., the Reverend P.J. Kavanagh, C.S.S.P., the Reverend T. Waters, C.C., the Reverend John M. Ivers, P.P., the Reverend P.J. Cleary, O.S.F., the Reverend L.J. Hickey, O.P., the Very Reverend Father Nicholas, O.S.F.C., the Very Reverend B. Gorman, O.D.C., the Reverend T. Maher, S.J., the Very Reverend James Murphy, S.J., the Reverend John Lavery, V.F., the Very Reverend William Doherty, D.D., the Reverend Peter Fagan, O.M., the Reverend T. Branglin, O.S.A., the Reverend J. Flavin, C.C., the Reverend M.A. Hackett, C.C., the Reverend W. Hurley, C.C., the Right Reverend M.G.R.N. Manus, V.G., the Reverend B.R. Slattery, O.M.I., the Very Reverend M.D. Scally, P.P., the Reverend F.T. Purcell, O.P., the Very Reverend Timothy Cannon Gorman, P.P., the Reverend J. Flanagan, C.C. The lady included P. Fay, T. Quirk, etc., talking about violent exercise, says Alf. Were you at that Keel Bennett match? No, says Joe. I heard so-and-so made a cool £100 over it, says Alf. Who? Blazes, says Joe. And says Bloom, what I meant about tennis, for example, is the agility and training the eye. Ah, Blazes, says Alf. He let out that Myler was on the beer to run up the odds and he's swatting all the time. We know him, says a citizen, the trader's son. We know what put English gold in his pocket. Dash true for you, says Joe. And Bloom cuts in again about lawn tennis and the circulation of the blood, asking Alf, now, don't you think, Bergen? Myler dusted the floor with him, says Alf. He and Sayers was only a bloody fool to it. Handed him the father and mother of a beating. See the little kipper not up to his navel and the big fella swiping. God, he gave him one last puck in the wind, Queensberry rules and all, made him puke what he never ate. It was a historic and a hefty battle when Myler and Percy were scheduled to don the gloves for the purse of 50 sovereigns. Handicapped as he was by lack of poundage, Dublin's pet lamb made up for it by superlative skill and ringcraft. The final bout of fireworks was a grueling for both champions. The welterweight Sergeant Major had tapped some lively claret in the previous mix-zoo, during which Keogh had been Receiver General of rights and lefts, the artilleryman putting in some neat work on the pet's nose, and Myler came in looking groggy. The soldier got to business, leading off with a powerful left jab to which the Irish gladiator retaliated by shooting out a stiff one flush to the point of Bennett's jaw. The redcoat ducked, but the Dubliner lifted him with the left hook, the body punch being a fine one. The men came to hand grips. Myler quickly became busy and got his man under, the bout ending with the bulkier man on the ropes, Myler punishing him. The Englishman, whose right eye was nearly closed, took his corner where he was liberally drenched with water, and when the bell went came on gaming and brimful of pluck, confident of knocking out the fisticular night and jig time. It was a fight to a finish and the best man for it. The two fought like tigers and excitement ran fever high. The referee twice cautioned Puck and Percy for holding, but the pet was tricky and his footwork a treat to watch. After a brisk exchange of courtesies during which a smart uppercut of the military man brought blood freely from his opponent's mouth, the lamb suddenly weighted and all over his man and landed a terrific left to battling Bennett's stomach, flooring him flat. It was a knockout clean and clever. In the tense expectation, the Portobello bruiser was being counted out when Bennett's second Olfotswitz time threw in the towel and the Santry boy was declared victor to the frenzied cheers of the public who broke through the ring ropes and fairly mobbed him with delight. He knows which side his bread is buttered, says Alf. I hear he's running a concert tour now up in the north. He is, says Joe. Isn't he? Who? Says Bloom. Ah, yes. That's quite true. Yes, a kind of summer tour, you see. Just a holiday. Mrs. B is the bright particular star, isn't she? Says Joe. My wife. Says Bloom. She's singing, yes. I think it will be a success too. He's an excellent man to organize. Excellent. Ho-ho-gob, says I to myself, says I, that explains the milk and the coconut and absence of hair on the animal's chest. Blaze is doing the tootle on the flute. Concert tour. Dirty Dame the Dodger's son off Island Bridge that sold the same horses twice over to the government to fight the Boers. Old wetwood. I called about the poor and water rate, Mr. Boylan. You. The water rate, Mr. Boylan. You what? That's the bucko that'll organize her, take my tip. Twixt me and you Kadarish. Pride of Calps Rocky Mount, the raven-headed daughter of Tweety. Their Gruchy to peerless beauty will look white and almonds in the air. The gardens of Elmina knew her step, the garths of Olives new and bad. The chaste spouse of Leopold is she, Marion of the bountiful bosoms. And lo, there entered one of the clan of the Malloys, a comely hero of white face yet withal somewhat ruddy, his majesty's counsel learned in the law, and with him the prince and heir of the noble line of Lambert. Hello, Ned. Hello, Alf. Hello, Jack. Hello, Joe. God save you, says a citizen. Save you kindly, says J.J. Will it be, Ned? Half one, says Ned. So J.J. ordered the drinks. Were you round at the court? Says Joe. Yes, says J.J. He'll square that, Ned, says he. Hope so, says Ned. Now what were those two at? J.J. getting him off the grand jury list and the other give him a leg over the stile. With his name in Stubbs's. Playing cards, hobnobbing at flash toffs with a swank glass in their eye, a drinking fizz and he half smothered in Ritz and Garney shoulders. Pawning his gold watch in Cummins of Francis Street where no one would know him in the private office when I was there with Pisser releasing his boots out of the pot. What's your name, sir? Dunn, says he. Ah, and Dunn says I gob, he'll come home by Weeping Cross one of those days, I'm thinking. Did you see that bloody lunatic brain round there? Says Alf. Up? Yes, says J.J. looking for a private detective. Ah, says Ned. And he wanted right go wrong to address the court only Corny Kelleher got round him telling him to get the handwriting examined first. £10,000, says Alf, laughing. God, I'd give anything to hear him before a judge and jury. Was it you did it, Alf? Says Joe. The truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you Jimmy Johnson. Me? Says Alf. Don't cast your nasturtiums on my character. Whatever statement you make, says Joe, will be taken down in evidence against you. Of course an action would lie, says J.J. It implies that he is not compos mentis. Up. Compose your eye, says Alf, laughing. Do you know that he's balmy? Look at his head. Do you know that some mornings he has to get his hat on with a shoehorn? Yes, says J.J., but the truth of a libel is no defense to an indictment for publishing it in the eyes of the law. Hectares ha, Alf, says Joe. Still, says Bloom, on account of the poor woman, I mean his wife. Pity about her, says a citizen. Or any other woman marries a half and half. How half and half? Says Bloom. Do you mean he? Half and half I mean, says a citizen. A fellow that's neither fish nor flesh. Not good red herring, says Joe. That what's I mean, says a citizen. A piss of, if you know what it is. Begob I saw there was trouble coming. And Bloom explaining he meant on account of it being cruel for the wife having to go round after the old stuttering fool. Cruelty to animals so it is to let that bloody poverty-stricken breen out on grass with his beard out tripping him, bringing down the rain. And she with her nose cock-a-hoop after she married him because a cousin of his old fellow's was pie-opener to the Pope. Picture of him on the wall with his Smashel Sweeney's mustaches, the Signor Brini from Summerhill, the Italiano, Papal's wave to the Holy Father, has left the key and gone to Moss Street. And who is he, tell us? A nobody, 2 pair bagging passages, at 7 shillings a week, and he covered with all kinds of breastplates bidding defiance to the world. And moreover, says J.J., upon Skyre's publication, it was held to be sufficient evidence of malice in the test case Sadro v. Hull. In my opinion an action might lie. 6 and 8 pence, please. who wants your opinion? Let us drink our pints in peace. Gob, we won't be late even to much itself. Well, good health, Jack, says Ned. Good health, Ned, says JJ. There he is again, says Joe. Where? Says Alf. And begob there he was passing the door with his books under his oxter and the wife beside him and Corny Kelter with his wall-eye looking in as they went past, talking to him like a father, trying to sell him a second-hand coffin. How did that Canada swindle case go off? Says Joe. Remanded, says JJ. One of the Bottlinost fraternity, it was went by the name of James Watt alias Saw Pharaoh alias Spark and Sparrow, put an ad in the paper saying he'd give a passage to Canada for 20 bob. What? Do you see any green in the white of my eye? Chorus, it was a bloody Barney. What? Swindled them all, scabies and bad hacks from the county Meath, and his own kidney too. JJ was telling us there was an ancient Hebrew Zaretsky or something weeping in the witness box with his hat on him, swearing by the holy Moses he was stuck for 2 quid. Who tried the case? Says Joe. Recorder, says Ned. Poor old Sir Frederick, says Alf. You can cut him up to the 2 eyes. Heart as big as a lion, says Ned. Tell him a tale of woe about the rears of rent and a sick wife and a squad of kids and, faith, he'll dissolve in tears on the bench. Ah, says Alf. Reuben J. was bloody lucky he didn't clap him in the dock the other day for suing poor little Gumley that's minding stones, for the corporation there near Butt Bridge. And he starts taking off the old recorder, letting on to cry, a most scandalous thing. This poor hard-working man. How many children? 10, did you say? Yes, your worship. And my wife has the typhoid. And the wife with typhoid fever. Scandalous. Leave the court immediately, sir. No, sir, I'll make no order for payment. How dare you, sir, come up before me and ask me to make an order? A poor hard-working industrious man. I dismiss the case. And whereas on the 16th day of the month of the Oxide Goddess and in the 3rd week after the feast day of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, the daughter of the skies, the Virgin Moon being then in her 1st quarter, it came to pass that those learned judges repaired them to the halls of the law. Their master Courtenay, sitting in his own chamber, gave his read and master Justice Andrews, sitting without a jury in the probate court, weighed well and pondered the claim of the first charge and upon the property and the matter of the will propounded in final testamentary disposition and re the real and personal estate of the late lamented Jacob Halliday, vintner, deceased, versus Livingstone, an infant, of unsound mind, and another. And to the solemn court of Green Street there came Sir Frederick the falconer. And he sat him there about the hour of 5 o'clock to administer the law of the Brehons at the commission for all that in those parts to be holden in and for the county of the city of Dublin. And there sat with him the high Sanhedrim of the 12 tribes of Ur, for every tribe 1 man, of the tribe of Patrick and of the tribe of Hugh and of the tribe of Owen and of the tribe of Conan and of the tribe of Oscar and of the tribe of Ferguson and of the tribe of Finn and of the tribe of Dermot and of the tribe of Cormac and of the tribe of Kevin and of the tribe of Carlton and of the tribe of Ossian, there being in all 12 good men and true. And he conjured them by him who died en route that they should well and truly try and true deliverance make and the issue joined between their sovereign lord the king and the prisoner at the bar and true verdict give according to the evidence, so help them God, and kiss the book. And they rose in their seats, those 12 of Ur, and they swore by the name of him who was from everlasting that they would do his righteousness. And straightway the minions of the law led forth from that and joined keep one whom the sleuth hounds of justice had apprehended in consequence of information received. and they shackled him hand and foot and would take of him any bail, any main prize, but preferred to charge against him, for he was a malefactor. "Those are nice things," says a citizen, "coming over here to Ireland, filling the country with bugs." So Bloom lets on he heard nothing, and he starts talking with Joe, telling him he needn't trouble about that little matter till the first, but if he would just say a word to Mr. Crawford. And so Joe swore high and holy by this and by that he'd to the devil and all. "Because, you see," says Bloom, "for an advertisement you must have repetition. That's the whole secret." "Rely on me," says Joe. "Swindling the peasants," says a citizen, "and the poor of Ireland. We want no more strangers in our house." "Oh, I'm sure that will be all right, Hines," says Bloom. "It's just that keys, you see." "Consider that done," says Joe. "Very kind of you," says Bloom. "The strangers," says a citizen. "Our own fault. We let them come in. We brought them in. The adulteress and her paramour brought the Saxon robbers here." "Decree nisi," says J.J., and Bloom, letting on to be awfully deeply interested in nothing, a spider's web in the corner behind the barrel, and the citizen scowling after him, the old dog at his feet looking up in Mohu to bite and win. "A dishonored wife," says the citizen, "that's what's the cause of all our misfortunes." "And here she is," says Alf, that was giggling over the Police Gazette with Terry on the counter, and all her war pain. "Give us a squint at her," says I, and what was it, only one of the smutty Yankee pictures Terry borrows off of Corny Kelleher. "Secrets for enlarging your private parts. Misconduct of Society Bell. Norman W. Tupper, wealthy Chicago contractor, finds pretty but faithless wife in lap of Officer Taylor. Bell and her bloomers misconducting herself, and her fancy man feeling for her tickles, and Norman W. Tupper bouncing in with his pea shooter just in time to be late after she doing the trick of the loop with Officer Taylor. "Oh, Jakers, Jenny," says Joe, "how short your shirt is." "There's hair, Joe," says I. "Get a queer old tailend of corned beef off of the one, what?" So anyhow in came John Wise Nolan and Linehan with him, with the face on him as long as a late breakfast. "Well," says the citizen, "what's the latest from the scene of action? What did those tinkers in the city hall at their caucus meeting decide about the Irish language?" "Oh, Nolan, clad in shining armor, low-bending made obeisance to the puissant high and mighty chief of all Erin, and did him to wit of that which had befallen, how that the grave elders of the most obedient city, second of the realm, had met them in the forecastle, and there, after due prayers to the gods who dwell in ether supernal, had taken solemn counsel whereby they might, if so be it might be, bring once more into honor among mortal men the winged speech of the sea divided gale. It's on the march," says the citizen. "To hell with the bloody brutal Cynics and their patis." So J.J. puts in a word, doing the talk about one story was good till you heard another, and blinking facts and the Nelson policy, putting your blind eye to the telescope and drawing up a bill of attainder to impeach a nation, and Bloom trying to back him up, moderation and botheration and their colonies and their civilization. "Their civilization, you mean," says a citizen. "To hell with them. The curse of a good-for-nothing god light sideways on the bloody thick-lugged sons of whores gets. No music and no art and no literature worthy of the name. In a civilization they stole from us. Tongue-wet-eyed sons of bastards ghosts. The European family," says J.J. "They're not European," says a citizen. "I was in Europe at Kevin Egan of Paris. You wouldn't see a trace of them or their language anywhere in Europe except in a cabinet d'essence. And says John Wise, full many a flower is born to blush unseen. And says Lenihan, that knows a bit of the lingo, can spy as less Anglais. Perfide Albion. he said, and then lifted he in his rude great brawny strength he hands them her dark strong foam ale, and, uttering his tribal slogan Lamb, the hour Gabu, he drank to the undoing of his foes, a race of mighty valorous heroes, rulers of the waves, who sit on thrones of alabaster silent as the deathless gods. "What's up with you?" says I to Lanahan. "You look like a fellow that had lost a bob and found the tanner." "Gold Cup," says he. "Who won, Mr. Lanahan?" says Terry. "Throwaway," says he, "at 20-1. A rank outsider. And the rest nowhere. And bases mare," says Terry. "Still running," says he. We were all in a cart. Boland plunged £2 on my tip scepter for himself and a lady friend. "I had half a crown myself," says Terry, "on Zinfandel that Mr. Flint gave me." "Lord Howard the Waldens." 20-1, says Lanahan. "Such is life in an outhouse." "Throwaway," says he. Takes the biscuit, and talking about bunions. "Frailty, I name my scepter." So he went over to the biscuit tin. Bob Doran left to see if there was anything he could lift on the nod, the old cur after him backing his luck with his mangy snout up. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard. "Not there, my child," says he. "Keep your pecker up," says Joe. She'd have won the money only for the other dog. And J.J. and the citizen arguing about lawn history with Bloom sticking in an odd word. "Some people," says Bloom, "can see the mote in others' eyes but they can't see the beam in their own." "Rim eyes," says the citizen. "There's no one as blind as the fellow that won't see, if you know what that means. Where our missing 20 millions of Irish should be here today instead of 4, our lost tribes. And our potteries and textiles, the finest in the whole world. And our wool that was sold in Rome in the time of Juvenal, and our flax and our damask from the looms of Antrim, and our Limerick lace, our tanneries and our white flint glass down there by Bilbao, and our Huguenot poplin that we have since jock-haired Deline, and our woven silk and our Foxford tweeds and ivory race point from the Carmelite convent near Ross, nothing like it in the whole wide world. Where are the Greek merchants that came through the Pillars of Hercules, the Gibraltar now grabbed by the foe of mankind, with gold and Tyrian purple to sell on Wexford at the Fair of Carmen? Read Tacitus and Ptolemy, even Giraldus Cambrensis. Wine, peltries, Connemara marble, silver from Tipperary, second to none, our far-famed horses even today, the Irish hobbies, with King Philip of Spain offering to pay customs duties for the right to fish in our waters. What do the Eli Johns of Angling owe us for our ruined trade and our ruined hearths? And the beds of the Barrow and Shannon they won't deepen with millions of acres of marsh and bog to make us all die of consumption. As Ulysses Portugal will be soon, says John Wise, for Hurligoland with its one tree if something is not done to reforest the land. Larches, firs, all the trees in the conifer family are going fast. I was reading a report of Lord Castleton's. "Save them," says a citizen, "the giant ash of Galway and the chieftain elm of Kildare with a 40-foot bole and an acre of foliage. Save the trees of Ireland for the future men of Ireland on the fair hills of our, oh Europe has its eyes on you," says Lenihan. The fashionable international world attended en masse this afternoon at the wedding of the Chevalier Jean Wisden, Grand High Chief Ranger of the Irish National Foresters, with Miss Fir Conifer of Pine Valley, Lady Sylvester Elmshade, Mrs. Barbara Levy Birch, Mrs. Polash, Mrs. Holly Haslies, Miss Daphne Bays, Miss Dorothy Cannebrake, Mrs. Clyde Twelvetrees, Mrs. Roland Green, Mrs. Helen Vinnegadding, Miss Virginia Creeper, Miss Gladys Beach, Miss Olive Garth, Miss Blanche Maple, Mrs. Maud Mahogany, Miss Myra Myrtle, Miss Priscilla Elderflower, Miss B. Honeysuckle, Miss Grace Poplar, Miss O. Mimosa Sand, Miss Rachel Cedar Frond, the Mrs. Lillian and Viola Lilac, Miss Timidity Espino, Mrs. Kitty Dewey Moss, Miss May Hawthorne, Mrs. Gloriana Palm, Mrs. Leona Forrest, Mrs. Arabelle Blackwood and Mrs. Norma Holyoke of Oakham Regis graced the ceremony by their presence. The bride, who was given away by her father, the M. Conifer of the Glens, looked exquisitely charming in a creation carried out in green mercerized silk, molded on an underslip of gloaming gray, sashed with a yoked broad emerald and finished with a triple flounce of darker hued fringe, the scheme being relieved by bretelles and hip insertions of acorn bronze. The maids of honor, Miss Larch Conifer and Miss Spruce Conifer, sisters of the bride, wore very becoming costumes in the same tone, a dainty motif of plume rose being worked into the pleats and a pinstripe and repeated capriciously in the jade green toques in the form of hair and feathers of pleat and tinted coral. Senhor Enrique Flower presided at the organ with his well-known ability and, in addition to the prescribed numbers of the nuptial mass, played a new and striking arrangement off Woodman, Spare That Tree at the conclusion of the service. On leaving the church of St. Fiacre and Horton after the papal blessing, the happy pair were subjected to a playful crossfire of hazelnuts, beech mast, bay leaves, catkins of willow, ivy thawed, holly berries, mistletoe sprigs and quicken shoots. Mr. and Mrs. Wise Conifer Neowen will spend a quiet honeymoon in the Black Forest. And our eyes are on Europe, says a citizen. We had our trade with Spain and the French and with the Flemings before those mongrels were pupped, Spanish ale and Galway, the Winnabark on the wide dark waterway. And we'll again, says Joe. And with the help of the Holy Mother of God we will again, says a citizen, clapping his thigh. Our harbors that are empty will be full again, Queenstown, Kinsale, Galway, Blacksode Bay, Ventry in the Kingdom of Kerry. Killybegs, the third largest harbour in the wide world with a fleet of masts of the Galway Lynches and the Cavan O'Reillys and the O'Kennedys of Dublin when the Earl of Desmond could make a treaty with the Emperor Charles V himself. And will again, says he, when the first Irish battleship is seen breasting the waves with our own flag to the fore, none of your Henry Tudor's harps, no, the oldest flag afloat, the flag of the province of Desmond and Thomond, 3 crowns on a blue field, the 3 sons of Milesius. And he took the last swig out of the pipe. More. All wind and piss like a tawny cat. Cows and Connaught have long horns. As much as his bloody life is worth to go down and address his tall talk to the assembled multitude and show how golden where he daren't single quote he show his nose with the Molly Maguires looking for him to let daylight through him for grabbing the holding of an evictive tenant. Here to that, says John Wise. What we have. An imperial yeomanry, says Linehan, to celebrate the occasion. Half one, Terry, says John Wise, and a hands up. Terry. Are you asleep? Yes, sir, says Terry. Small whiskey and bottle of Allsop. Right, sir. Hanging over the bloody paper with Alf looking for spicy bits instead of attending to the general public. Picture of a budding match, trying to crack their bloody skulls. One chap going for the other with his head down like a bull at a gate. And another one, black beast burned in Omaha, Georgia. A lot of dead dicks in slouch hats and they firing at a Sambo strung up in a tree with his tongue out in a bonfire under him. Gob, they ought to drown him in the sea after an electrocute and crucify him to make sure of their job. But what about the fighting navy, says Ned. That keeps our foes at bay. I'll tell you what about it, says a citizen. Hell upon earth it is. Read the revelations that's going on in the papers about flogging on the training ships at Portsmouth. A fellow writes that calls himself Disgusted One. So he starts telling us about corporal punishment and about the crew of Tarzan officers and rear admirals drawn up in cocked hats and the parson with his Protestant Bible to witness punishment, and a young lad brought out, howling for his ma, and they tie him down on the butt end of a gun. A rampant dozen, says a citizen, was what the old ruffian Sir John Beresford called it, but the modern God's Englishman calls it caning on the breech. And says John Wise, "'Tis a custom more honored in the breach than in the observance." Then he was telling us the master-at-arms comes along with a long cane and he draws out and he flogs the bloody backside off of the poor lad till he yells "Mail and murder." "That's your glorious British Navy," says a citizen, "that bosses the earth. The fellows that never will be slaves, with the only hereditary chamber on the face of God's earth and their land in the hands of a dozen gamhogs and cotton ball barons. That's the great empire that boasts about of drudges and whipped serfs, on which the sun never rises," says Joe. "And the tragedy of it is," says a citizen, "they believe it. The unfortunate yahoos believe it. They believe in Rod, the Scourger Almighty, creator of hell upon earth, and in Jack Guitar, the son of a gun, who was conceived of unholy boast, born of the fighting navy, suffered under rampant dozen, was scarified, flayed and curd, yelled like bloody hell. The third day he arose again from the bed, steered into haven, sitteth on his beam till further orders, whence he shall come to drudge for a living and be paid." "But," says Bloom, "isn't discipline the same everywhere? I mean, wouldn't it be the same here if you put force against force? Didn't I tell you? As true as I'm drinking this porter, if he was at his last gasp he'd try to downface you that dying was living." "We'll put force against force," says a citizen. "We have our Greater Ireland beyond the sea. They were driven out of house and home in the Black 47. Their mud cabins and their shillings by the roadside were laid low by the batter Ingram, and the Times rubbed its hands and told the wide illiterate Saxons there would soon be as few Irish in Ireland as Redskins in America. Even the Grand Turk sent us his piastres. But the Sassanite tried to starve the nation at home while the land was full of crops that the British hyenas bought and sold in Rio de Janeiro. They drove out the peasants in hordes. 20,000 of them died in the coal-fin ships. But those that came to the land of the free remember the land of bondage. And they will come again, and with a vengeance, no cravens, the sons of Grinwale, the champions of Kathleen Houlihan." "Perfectly true," says Bloom. "But my point was, we're a long time waiting for that day, citizen," says Ned. "Since the poor old woman told us that the French were on the sea and landed at Killala." Says John Wise. "We fought for the Royal Stuarts that reneged us against the Williamites and they betrayed us. Remember Limerick and the broken treaty stone. We gave our best blood to France and Spain, the wild geese. Fontenoy, eh? And Sarsfield and O'Donnell, Duke of Tetuan in Spain, and the Ulysses Brown of chemist that was Field Marshal to Maria Theresa. But what did we ever get for it?" "The French," says the citizen. "Set a dancing masters. Do you know what it is? They were never worth roasted fart to Ireland. Aren't they trying to make an entente cordiale now at Taipei's dinner party with perfidious Albion? Firebrands of Europe, and they always were." "Conspires les Français," says Linehan, nobbling his beer. "And as for the Prussians and the Hanoverians," says Joe, "haven't we had enough of those sausage-eating bastards on the throne, from George the Elector down to the German lad in the flatulent old bitch that's dead? Jesus, I had to laugh at the way he came out with that about the old one with the winkers on her, blind drunk in her royal palace every night to God, old Vic. with her jorum of Mountain Dew and her coachman carting her up body and bones to roll into bed, and she pulling him by the whiskers and singing him old bits of songs about Aaron on the Rhine and come where the booze is cheaper. "Well," says JJ, "we have Edward the peacemaker now." "Tell that to a fool," says the citizen. "There's a bloody sight more pox than packs about that boyo." Edward Gelfwedden. "And what do you think," says Joe, "of the holy boys, the priests and bishops of Ireland doing up his room in Maynooth and his satanic majesty's racing colours and sticking up pictures of all the horses his jockeys rode? The Earl of Dublin, no less. They ought to have stuck up all the women he rode himself," says Little Alf. And says JJ, "Considerations of space influenced the lordship's decision. We can try another, citizen," says Joe. "Yes, sir," says he. "I will." "You," says Joe. "Beholden to you, Joe," says I, "may your shadow never grow less." "Repeat that, Dose," says Joe. Bloom was talking with John Wise, and he quite excited with his Dunnockatamid-colored mug on him and his old plume eyes rolling about. "Persecution," says he, "all the history of the world is full of it. Perpetuating national hatred among nations." "But do you know what a nation means?" says John Wise. "Yes," says Bloom. "What is it?" says John Wise. "A nation," says Bloom. "A nation is the same people living in the same place." "By God, then," says Ned, laughing, "if that's so, I'm a nation, for I'm living in the same place for the past 5 years." So of course everyone had to laugh at Bloom, and says he, trying to muck out of it, "We're also living in different places." "That covers my case," says Joe. "What is your nation, if I may ask?" says the citizen. "Ireland," says Bloom. "I was born here." "Ireland." The citizen said nothing, only cleared the spit out of his gullet and, gob, he spat a red bank oyster out of him right in the corner. "After you with the push, Joe," says he, taking out his handkerchief to swab himself dry. "Here you are, citizen," says Joe. "Take it in your right hand and repeat after me the following words. The much treasured and intricately embroidered ancient Irish face cloth attributed to Solomon Drummond Monus to Maltaj Ogmacdono, authors of the Book of Bullermoa, was then carefully produced and called forth prolonged admiration. No need to dwell on the legendary beauty of the corner pieces, the acme of art, wherein one can distinctly discern each of the 4 evangelists in turn presenting to each of the 4 masters his evangelical symbol, a bog oak scepter, a North American puma, a far nobler king of beasts than the British article, be it said in passing, a carry calf and a golden eagle from Carnontwell Hill. The scenes depicted on the Amuncary field, showing our ancient duns and raths and cromlechs and grynons and seats of learning and maledictive stones, are as wonderfully beautiful and the pigments as delicate as when the Sligo illuminators gave free rein to their artistic fantasy long ago in the time of the Barmecides. Glendalough, the lovely lakes of Killarney, the ruins of Clonmacnoise, Cong Abbey, Gleneagles and the 12 Pins, Ireland's Eye, the green hills of Tillet, Crowpatrick, the brewery of Messrs. Arthur Guinness, Son and Company Limited, Lyonig's Banks, the Vale of Ovoca, Exalta's Tower, the Mappus Obelisk, Sir Patrick Dunn's Hospital, Cape Clear, the Glen of Arlo, Lynch's Castle, the Scotch House, Rathdown Union Workhouse in Laughlin, Tullamore Jail, Castle O'Connell Rapids, Kilbilly-Mac-Shaughnakill, the Cross at Monaster Boys, Jerry's Hotel, S. Patrick's Purgatory, the Salmon Leap, Maynooth College Refectory, Curly's Hall, the 3 birthplaces of the first Duke of Wellington, the Rocket Castle, the Bog of Allen, the Henry Street Warehouse, Fingal's cave. All these moving scenes are still there for us. Did they rendered more beautiful still by the waters of sorrow which have passed over them and by the rich incrustations of time. Show us over the drink, says I. Which is which? That's mine, says Joe, as the devil said to the dead policeman. And I belong to a race too, says Bloom, that is hated and persecuted. Also now, this very moment, this very instant. Gob, he near burnt his fingers with the butt of his old cigar. Robbed, says he. Plundered. Insulted. Persecuted. Taking what belongs to us by right. At this very moment, says he, putting up his fist, sold by auction in Morocco like slaves or cattle. Are you talking about the New Jerusalem? Says the citizen. I'm talking about injustice, says Bloom. Right, says John Wise. Stand up to it then with force like men. That's an almanac picture for ye. Marked for a soft-nosed bullet. Old lardy face standing up to the business end of the gun. Gob, he'd adorn his sweeping brush, so he would, if he only had a nurse's apron on him. And then he collapses all of a sudden, twisting around all the opposite, as limp as a wet rag. But it's no use, says he. Force, hatred, history, all that. That's not life for men and women, insult and hatred. And everybody knows that it's the very opposite of that that is really life. What? Says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean the opposite of hatred. I must go now, says he to John Wise. Just round to the court a moment to see if Martin is there. If he comes to say I'll be back in a second. Just a moment. Who's hindering ye? And off he pops like greased lightning. A new apostle to the Gentiles, says the citizen. Universal love. Well, says John Wise, isn't that what we are told? Love your neighbor. That chap, says the citizen. Beggar my neighbor is his motto. Love, more. He's a nice pattern of a Romeo and Juliet. Love loves to love. Nurse loves the new chemist. Constable 14A loves Mary Kelly. Gertie McDowell loves the boy that has the bicycle. MB loves a fair gentleman. Lychee Han loves the up-kissy trapuchow. Jumbo, the elephant, loves Alice, the elephant. Old Mr. Verscoil with the ear trumpet loves old Mrs. Verscoil with the Turnitin eye. The man in the brown Macintosh loves the lady who is dead. His Majesty the King loves Her Majesty the Queen. Mrs. Norman W. Tupper loves Officer Taylor. You love a certain person, and this person loves the other person because everybody loves somebody but God loves everybody. Well, Joe, says I, you're very good health and song. More power, citizen. Hooray, there, says Joe. The blessing of God and Mary and Patrick on you, says the citizen. And he ups with his pint to wet his whistle. We know those canners, says he, preaching and picking your pocket. What about sanctimonious Cromwell and his Ironsides that put the women and children of Drogheda to the sword of the Bible text God is love pasted round the mouth of his cannon? The Bible. Did you read that in the United Irishman today about that Zulu chief that's visiting England? What's that? Says Joe. So the citizen takes up one of his paraphernalia papers and he starts reading out. A delegation of the chief cotton magnates of Manchester was presented yesterday to His Majesty the Eloquent of a beaked by gold stick and waiting, Lord walk up on eggs, to tender to His Majesty the heartfelt thanks of British traders for the facilities afforded them in his dominions. The delegation partook of luncheon, at the conclusion of which the dusky potentate, in the chorus of a happy speech, freely translated by the British chaplain, the Reverend Ananias Price Godbar Evans, tendered his best thanks to Massawa and emphasized the cordial relations existing between Abikud and the British Empire, stating that he treasured as one of his dearest possessions an illuminated Bible, the volume of the Word of God and the secret of England's greatness, graciously presented to him by the white chief woman, the great squaw Victoria, with a personal dedication from the august hand of the royal donor. The Alaka then drank a loving cup of first Chachi's Kabao to the toast black and white from the skull of his immediate predecessor in the dynasty Kalkakuka, surnamed 40 Wards, after which he visited the chief factory of Cottonopolis and signed his mark in the visitor's book, subsequently executing a charming old Abikudic wardens, in the chorus of which he swallowed several knives and forks, amid hilarious applause from the girl hands. "What a woman," says Ned. "I wouldn't doubt her. Wonder did he put the Bible to the same use as I would." "Same only more so," says Lenehan. And thereafter in the fruitful land the broad-leaved mango flourished exceedingly. "Is that by Griffith?" says John Wise. "No," says a citizen. "It's not San Shangana. It's only initialed, P, and a very good initial too," says Joe. "That's how it's worked," says a citizen. "Trade follows the flag." "Well," says JJ, "if they're any worse than those Belgians in the Congo Free State they must be bad. Did you read that report by a man what's this his name is?" "Casement," says a citizen. "He's an Irishman." "Yes, that's the man," says JJ, "raping the women and girls and flogging the natives on the belly to squeeze all the red rubber they can out of them." "I know where he's gone," says Linehan, cracking his fingers. "Who?" says I. Bloom, says he. "The courthouse is a blind. He had a few bob on throwaway and he's gone to gather in the shekels." "Is it that whitey-eyed kafir," says the citizen, "that never backed a horse in anger in his life?" "That's where he's gone," says Lenehan. "I met Bantam Lyons going to back that horse, only I put him off and he told me Bloom gave him the tip. Bet you what you like he has 100 shillings to 5 on. He's the only man in Dublin who's a dark horse." "He's a bloody dark horse himself," says Joe. "Mind, Joe," says I, "show us the entrance out." "There you are," says Terry. "Goodbye, Ireland, I'm going to go." So I just went round the back of the yard to pump ship and begob 100 shillings to 5 while I was letting off my throwaway 22. Letting off my load, gob, says I to myself. I knew he was uneasy in his 2 pints off of Joe and 1 in slatteries off in his mind to get off the mark. 200 shillings is 5 quid, and when they were in the Dark Horse, Pissa Burke was telling the card party and letting on the child was sick. Gob must have done about a gallon full of BRs of a wife speaking down the tube. She's better or she's, oh, all the plan so he could have a moose with the pull if he went, or Jesus, full up I was, trading without a license. Oh, Ireland, my nation, says he. Hook. Thuk. Never be up to those bloody, there's the last of it, Jerusalem. Ah. Cuckoos. So anyhow when I got back they were at Ding Dong. John Wise saying it was Bloom gave the ideas for Sinn Féin to Griffith to put in his paper all kinds of gerrymandering, packed juries and swindling the taxes off of the government and appointing consuls all over the world to walk about selling Irish industries. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. Gob, that puts the bloody kibosh on it if old sloppy eyes is mucking up the show. Give us a bloody chance. God save Ireland from the likes of that bloody mouseabout. Mr. Bloom with his Galbargal. And his old fellow before him perpetrating frauds. Old Methuselah Bloom, the robbing bagman, that poisoned himself with the prussic acid after he swamping the country with his baubles and his penny diamonds. Loans by post on easy terms. Any amount of money advanced on note of hand. Distance no object. No security. Gob, he's like Londy Mackle's goat, he'd go a piece of the road with everyone. Well, it's a fact, says John Wise. And there's the man now that'll tell you all about it, Martin Cunningham. Sure enough, the castle car drove up with Martin on it and Jack Power with him and a fella named Crofton, pensioner out of the Collector General's, and Orringham and Blackburn does have on the registration, and he drawing his pair Crawford gallivanting around the country at the king's expense.